Hello and welcome everybody to our Living Well with a Stoma event. Brilliant to see so many of you here. I can see that the numbers are rising, but it's brilliant to welcome everybody on a fairly, well, it's quite chilly here, Wednesday night. So thank you everyone for joining. My name's Catherine and I'm Director of Services at Bowel Cancer UK, and I'm be hosting for you this evening. We've got some brilliant speakers and a real opportunity for you to hopefully find out a bit more about managing stomas, and an opportunity to ask questions as well a bit later on of both our speakers. So there's just a few little bits of housekeeping for me to motor through, so do bear with me. First up is just to say a huge thank you to Coloplast. Coloplast Limited have actually provided a donation to us to enable us to bring you this event this evening. So they've not had any input at all into the agenda or the content of this meeting, but they have made that donation. That means we can bring it to you free of charge. So thank you, Coloplast. There are a couple of interactive functions that I just want to talk you through. One of those in your controls on the bottom window is the chat icon. When you click on that, the chat window will appear. It will be on the right hand side of your screen if you're not in full screen, and if you're in full screen it'll appear in a window and you can move it about. So we'd really love it if you could use the chat box to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us why you're joining us tonight, and just give us feedback as the event's going on, you know, what you're finding interesting, if there's anything that you'd like more information on. And staff from Bowel Cancer UK, our team, will also be in the chat, popping up any links to resources that might help, or things that one of our speakers might mention that we might want to signpost you to during the event. All the comments in the chat box are visible to everybody, but they won't show on the recording. So we're recording tonight's event and we turn it into a little film and pop it on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again, and other people who can't join us live can watch it. So your names don't show and your comments in the chat box don't show on the recording. You can also use the chat box if you want to send a private message to Bowel Cancer UK staff. If you click on the who can see your comment bit, one of the options is Bowel Cancer UK staff only, so feel free to do that if you want to. The other option that you have is the Q&A box. So this is where we would like you to pop any questions that you'd like me to pose to our speakers when we get to the Q&A part of the agenda tonight. Please try and remember to pop questions for speakers in the Q&A box, not the chat box, because I can't see the chat box, but I can see and can control the Q&A box. So questions in the Q&A box, please. We won't, and I won't be reading out the names of anybody when I ask a question on your behalf. So again, in terms of the recording, your privacy is protected. As I've said, we are recording tonight's event, and we will email you the link to the event after we've finished, so you can review all of the information. There may be some QR codes, you know, those funny little squares with black fuzzy dots, that we use to show various to link to various resources during the event. So if you've got an Apple or Android phone, you just open up your camera and scan, point the camera at the QR code and it takes you straight there. For those of you who either don't have that function, don't worry, nothing that we're putting in a QR code is secret and only for people who can do that. We will also be sending you the links in the follow-up information that we send afterwards. As always with these events, there is an evaluation form that we will email around after the event and pop a link to in the chat when we get towards the end of the session. It would be fabulous if you could just take a couple of minutes to fill that in for us. Not only does it tell us what you thought of the event and what you'd like us to do further events, but it also enables us to get the funding to continue to put on these events for free. So a big plea from all of us for the evaluation when we've finished. Right, enough talking from me, time for you to do some work. We're just going to warm you up a bit. I always really like to know who's watching and where you're joining us from. So we have a couple of polls that we're going to pop up on the screen now. So our first one is, where are you joining us from? So if you could just let us know. I love it when we get 4-nation representation around the UK, and we've achieved it. Look at that, brilliant. I can see the numbers coming in. Okay, so if we can share those results, that would be great. So we've got lots of people from England, but we do have someone joining us from north of the border in Scotland, and also from Wales and Northern Ireland. That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, how many of you are watching? Because we know that sometimes it's just one person, but sometimes there's a +1 or a +2 or maybe a gang. And then we're really interested to know who those people are, whether or not they're friends and family, partner. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about who's watching. Okay, so if we can share those results, that would be great. So we've got lots of "it's just me" and a few with a +1, and those people are partners and friends. So that's brilliant. Thank you for just flexing your fingers and your brains to tell us where you are and who's watching. Okay, right, so without further ado, that's enough of me waffling on. You'll see me back again towards the end, but I am delighted to introduce our first speaker for the evening, and that is Melissa Holland. So Melissa, and I can see in the chat that there's a few patients who know you, Melissa, are in the chat, because they've given you a bit of a shout out that you're their stoma nurse. Melissa is lead stoma care clinical nurse specialist at Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. So Melissa, welcome.
Cheers, Catherine.
Brilliant. And I'm going to disappear from the screen and leave everybody in your very capable hands.
Thank you, Catherine. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for listening. Obviously, covering everything about a stoma in just a short time is impossible. I'm sure you'll realise that. A question just before we start. There was going to be a poll question just to ask what type of stoma you have, if you already have one, or whether you haven't got a stoma or you might have one in the future. I can see quite a lot of people, there's about equal colostomy and ileostomy, and some that don't have a stoma currently. So I should try and cover a little bit this evening on all, but bear with me, and they won't be covering everything, unfortunately. So what we're going to do this evening, I'm going to go through first what a stoma is, the digestive system, types of stoma, accepting a change, some common questions, and some useful contacts.
So what is a stoma? Stoma basically means mouth or opening. The full name of the stoma depends on where it's located, and there's many reasons why a stoma may be required, but bowel cancer is just one of them. Next slide, please. So with the digestive system, normally when you eat, everything goes into your mouth and down your esophagus and into your stomach, where it stays for about 1 to 4 hours. It then goes into the small bowel, which is made up of the duodenum, the jejunum and the ileum. At the end of the small bowel, the output's like a porridgey consistency. It then goes into the colon, where the water gets absorbed. It goes up the ascending colon, along the transverse colon at the top there where you can see. Then it goes down the descending colon into the sigmoid, and what you'd normally pass when you're all connected is a forward motion out of your back passage. So there's different types of stoma. There are lots of different types of stoma, but the main ones we're talking about this evening is an ileostomy, which is a mouth or opening from the ileum, or a colostomy, which means mouth or opening from the colon. With an ileostomy, it's usually positioned on the right-hand side of the body, and it's usually at the end of the ileum, and in which case you've absorbed all the nutrients you need out of your food. It could be further back in the small bowel, and you may have other considerations with your diet and fluids, but we can't cover everything this evening. So if your stoma is at the end of your small bowel, you have hopefully a stoma that has a small spout, because we know that the output's going to be porridgine loose. You'll need a drainable pouch. Now that may be a 1-piece or a 2-piece, and you'll need to empty your pouch about 5 or 6 times a day. And the output will be between 400 mils and 1,000 mils in any one day. However, this will be dependent on what you've had to eat or drink. For a colostomy, that's often on the left-hand side of the body. And if you have most of your colon, it will be then like a formed motion. So the stoma can afford to be flat. The feces is often formed as if it was like coming out of your bottom. And therefore, the pouches are difficult to empty. So most people will have a pouch that they change once or twice a day as a closed pouch. Again, this could be a 1-piece or a 2-piece pouch system. Obviously, having a stoma can have a huge impact and it can be quite daunting, but it shouldn't stop you doing from the things that you normally enjoy, and most things are still acceptable with a stoma. It just takes time to get your head around it and to feel capable again. Ways to help you adjust are to understand why the stoma has been required in the first place. Know why you needed a stoma. Has it been to protect a joint while you had a surgery? Has it been to bypass a tumour sitting in your bowel? Is it why you're getting over other surgery and that is going to be put back together again, or is it going to be a permanent fixture? Understand where the stoma is, whether it's a colostomy or an ileostomy, and so therefore you'd understand what to expect from it. It's not for everybody, but some people consider naming their stoma. Sometimes it's helpful when you're going out and about to, if you need to deal with it, to be able to refer to it by a name, saying that I'm just going to go and deal with Fred, or I'm going to go and deal with Poppy, whatever you choose to call your stoma. But it's not for everyone. Also, when you newly have a stoma, it's quite often helpful to meet another person with a stoma. You can meet as many stoma nurses and doctors and people in the health profession as you like, but it's not quite the same as the companionship you may have from somebody else who's going through something similar. Also consider joining the Colostomy or the Ileostomy Association. They're also very supportive with what you'll be going through, and they have lots of help and advice, and it's often run by people who either have or had a stoma. Always be prepared when you're going out. I can't stress this enough. You can't nip in the local supermarket and buy things, so please make sure you take things with you. Always have a change of pouch, and I would suggest more than one, because even if you're never caught short, it'd be the one time when you need to change your bag and you drop it on the floor or something daft. Think about having a couple of clothes pegs with your equipment so you can peg your clothes out of the way. Have some wet wipes with you. I say not baby wipes. Baby wipes often have lanolin in, so they're slightly greasy and therefore can stop your bag sticking well. If you haven't got wet water wipes, just ordinary dry wipes made moist. You could do this by putting some in a freezer bag that's sealed at the top. That would keep them damp, or into a small Tupperware box. Your stoma nurse or your delivery company should be able to issue you with a disabled toilet key. This can be very handy if you're out and about and you get taken where you need to use a disabled toilet, where of course it will be better because there's always a sink in a disabled toilet, and also usually they're unisex, so there will be the right sort of sanitary towel bin where you can throw away your stoma bag. Your stoma nurse should also be able to give you an urgent toilet card. This is a card that you can put into your wallet or your purse, and you can just show it to somebody to show that you have a medical need and you need to use the toilet urgently. If you first have a stoma, it's probably a good idea to set the alarm at night if needed, particularly if you have an ileostomy and you're needing to empty your bag regularly. Even if you've been going all night, you may find that when you go home from hospital, the change of diet and the change of time of when you're eating, that it can't be so relied upon. So I always suggest to people they set the alarm at first for a few hours after they've gone to bed, just to make sure their bag is not overfilling. Despite the type of stoma you have, learn about what your input is, the diet and fluids, and how it's affecting the output, and this will help you to have more control. Of course, if you're worried about anything, contact your stoma nurse specialist for advice. So there's lots of common questions, and sadly I can only cover a few of them today. So, do I need a special diet? This is one that we're asked often, and the answer is it depends on really where your stoma is. Your stoma CNS, your dietitian, your doctor, and your booklet can help you. Follow the advice from these things. So if you have a colostomy where the output is hopefully formed, if it's towards the end of the colon, then you shouldn't really need a special diet. However, it will depend on where in the colon your stoma has been formed. So if your stoma is at the beginning of the colon, in what we call the ascending colon, just after the small bowel, the output is going to be more liquid. And so therefore you may want to follow some of the advice that we give to people with ileostomies. If, however, your colostomy is on the left and the output is formed and like a normal poo, you may want to change your diet according to what's happening with the output, and you're going to be much more aware. However, it will be like a normal poo. If you were someone who used to go to the toilet once a day, hopefully when things settle, you will go back to going just once a day, or maybe twice. If you went every other day, it may go back to being every other day. It's whatever was normal for you. The difference is you now no longer got a sphincter. At the end of your rectum on your anus, you have muscles that stop you going to the toilet, and you can delay it until it's appropriate. When you have a stoma, you've no longer got that sphincter, and so you've lost the control. Hence why you need to wear a stoma bag. By taking some control and learning what foods affect you, by keeping a food and fluid diary and what the output is doing, will help you. It may be that before you had a stoma, you could eat something like an apple and it had no effect at all. But now you have a stoma, you find that every time you eat an apple, you're quite loose. It just depends on what's happening in your own body. So with a colostomy, we're going to treat it almost as any other normal part of your bowel. If you're constipated and your motion's firm, you need to increase the fruits and fibre and vegetables and the fluids in your diet. If you're looser and you've got much diarrhea, you reduce the fruits and fibres and increase the carbohydrates, the pasta, the rice, the potato, things that will help to thicken it up. Flatus is a problem for everyone, whether you have a stoma or not. To help it, you want to avoid the foods that you know create more gas. This might be the Brussels sprouts, the baked beans, the cabbage. There'll be lots of information in the booklets, but you also want to try and avoid fizzy drinks where they're going to create more gas. Avoid chewing gum. We swallow a lot of air when you're chewing gum. Try not to drink and eat at the same time. You do find that if you're gulping fluid during the times when you're eating, you'll swallow more air. Also, try not to drink through a straw. When you drink through a straw, you swallow more air. And despite it being a social event, having a meal, do try to avoid talking and eating at the same time, because that also causes us to swallow more air. With an ileostomy, the output, as we've said, is always loose. It will be more like porridgey consistency. That is the aim. There may be times in the day when it's more watery than this, and times when it's thicker, depending on what you've had to eat or drink. You're going to need to empty the pouch several days. This is 4 or 5 times during the day, and sometimes once or twice at night. Again, you've lost the control as there's no sphincter muscle to stop the output coming out. Therefore, you need to wear the bag. Again, take some control by learning what foods affect you by keeping a food and fluid diary. What we will advise is more things like the carbohydrates, pasta, rice and potato to thicken the output. White bread instead of brown bread. You need to reduce the fibre in your diet. Sorry, next slide, I think. Sorry. Ileostomies also have a strong risk of having a blockage. That's because it's narrower, and when the stoma is made, the bowel is turned inside out, so there's a narrower mouth where it's coming through. So things that don't break down normally could come along and get stuck. Therefore, we suggest no nuts and no skins. Always peel your fruit if able. So if you were having an apple, take the skin off. Also be aware of dry fruit. That can be a problem sometimes coming through. In the booklets, it will suggest lots of things to avoid, and for some people, they need to avoid more things than others, in that some people can't manage to have sweet corn or peas. From my experience, often they will come through if your stoma is not too tiny. They just come through the way they went in. But do talk to your stoma nurse and be guided by what they advise. If you are having fruits and vegetables, well-cooked fruits and vegetables will help. They'll be softer and they'll go through easier. And also, when you cook fruit, it releases pectin, so it helps to make the output thicker. So in actual fact, applesauce is quite good for somebody who has an ileostomy. As I've said, the pasta, rice, potato and white bread are all the things that you need. In fact, it's the opposite to what we normally tell you is a healthy diet. We want you to not have the fruits and fibres and in fact have all the stodge. Some people swear by trying jelly babies and jelly and marshmallows. From experience, this may help just before you're going to change your stoma bag, but often you'd have to eat so many for the gelatine to make any difference that in fact it's not going to be that helpful. But everybody's different and some people find this helps. Also with an ileostomy, because the salt in from our digestive system, a lot of the salt is absorbed in the small bowel and towards the end of the small bowel and some more in the colon, that when you first have an ileostomy, we often advise you to have extra salt in your food. Now you can either add this to your food or try eating some salty things. Try crisps or crackers. It doesn't have to be unpleasant. The other thing we say, much as normally we tell you drinking water is really, really good for you, when you have an ileostomy, we tell you not to drink too much plain water. And this is because drinking too much plain water dilutes the salt at the end of the ileum and prevents you absorbing so much salt. Try to drink a mixture of drinks instead, things like squash. Some people suggest rehydration drinks, and that is possible. Things like sports Lucozade, which is flatter, so you won't get the wind, but gives you some of the salts and sugars back that you may be losing. For a lot of ileostomists, they need to take loperamide. Imodium is the other name for this, because we know the output is looser, and to control it and also to prevent you getting dehydrated. This isn't for everybody, but if you do get prescribed loperamide, you really need to take it on an empty stomach. Take it with a sip of water and then have nothing at all for at least half an hour afterwards for it to be most effective. It may be needed to be taken pre all meals and before bed, but you might need to learn to juggle the dose and the times that you require it. Discuss it with your stoma nurse and ask your GP to add it to your copy prescription. If you have an ileostomy, the chances are you may need loperamide at some point during your time with it. Again, the same as before with flatus, you want to avoid the fizzy drinks, avoid chewing gum, don't drink and eat at the same time, don't drink through a straw, and avoid talking and eating. Avoid foods that we know might give you a higher chance of having flatus. So another question we get asked is, why does my poo stay at the top of the pouch and not go into the bottom? This is often a problem more for colostomists, and it's known as pancaking. And what it is, it's when the poo becomes like a Play-Doh consistency. So it's not firm, so it's not heavy, so it's not dropping to the end of the bag, and it's not liquidy enough to drop to the end of the bag. Again, you can look at your diet, keeping your food diary, and see if there's any adjustments you can make to either make your poo a bit firmer or a bit more fluid. Despite what we normally tell you about cutting the bag, the hole in the bag to fit the stoma snugly, with this situation, sometimes we would tell you to cut the aperture in the pouch larger. This is to allow there to be a bigger opening to let the feces fall to the bottom of the pouch. And to also help would be to try folding a piece of toilet paper in the bottom of your pouch to keep the pouch slightly open. Because of the filters in the pouch, what often happens, it creates like a vacuum in the bag, and therefore unless your feces is heavy enough, it doesn't open enough to go down into the bag. By keeping a piece of folded toilet paper in the bag will keep it slightly open. Another thing you can try is putting some oil around the aperture of the pouch, and this might help the feces to slide into the bag. But be careful, always put the oil in when the paper on the back end is still in place. Don't try putting oil on once you've taken the paper off, otherwise your bag won't stick. The other thing you can do is speak to your stoma nurse for some advice and to reassess, and it might be that you need to try some alternative pouches. Sometimes different pouches have different effects for people. So we also get, my output's gone loose, is there anything I can do? Well, firstly, consider why. Have you eaten something that may have upset you? Have you perhaps got an upset tummy? Have you perhaps just had some chemotherapy? All of these things may affect it. Obviously, if you have an ileostomy and your output has gone much looser and has got much more in amount, if you're suddenly emptying your bag a lot more than you were normally, you need to be careful and you need to seek medical advice because you could get dehydrated quite quickly. If you're a colostomist, this shouldn't be such an issue. However, if you've been drinking a lot more, all of our output could go looser. So after reassessing your diet, if you have loperamide, take it. You could also consider using a gelling or solidifying agent to put inside of the pouch. This will help to make the output in the pouch thicker and easier to control. However, you do not want to mask the symptoms of having high output for an ileostomist. Another question we get asked is, can I exercise? The answer to that is yes. Actually, gentle exercise will be encouraged. Immediately after surgery, it's good to get back on your feet and good to be getting out and about. Walking is very good. It's getting the circulation going and getting your general strength up. When you've had a stoma formed, however, you have a hole in the muscle in your abdomen. And so we would suggest you avoid heavy lifting because the chances of a hernia can be quite high. To avoid this as well, support your abdominal muscles when you're coughing and moving and laughing. So if you put your hands across where your stoma is and press quite firmly, if you know you've got a cough coming or a sneeze, it will help to support those muscles and stop them jiggling about. Discuss with the stoma nurse, the physiotherapist and surgeon what exercises they will advise. And this may depend on how your surgery has been performed, whether or not they've had to open your tummy up or they've been able to do things as laparoscopic. We would also suggest that you start some core abdominal exercises. Now, there's lots of things online where you can look up after stoma surgery, the gentle exercises that you can start to strengthen those abdominal core. It is important to strengthen your abdominal core and to try to, your nurses will help you with this as well and advise you. But if you haven't been given any particular leaflets, there's plenty of information online and a lot of the companies have information about this. Certainly Convatec do a whole series with B+, where they've got a whole series of exercises in 4 stages. Another question I get asked is, can I swim? The answer to that is yes, once your wounds have healed. Please don't go swimming until your wounds have completely healed. But please also, if you're swimming, ensure you've got no leakage issues. It's not fair to use the swimming pool if you're having leaks. For some people, if they've got a colostomy, they might choose to use a stoma cap. They're only suitable for colostomists because they only really cover the stoma for a very short time and don't contain very much. You might want to consider your swimwear. If you're wearing swimming trunks, you might want to have a higher waisted pair of swimming trunks. If you're wearing a swimsuit, you might want to consider having a pattern or a ruched costume that will disguise the shape of the bag for you. Also, you might consider wearing a t-shirt. If you're abroad and having a swim and it's sunny, no one's going to even think about this. So many people wear t-shirts to protect themselves from the sun. If you want to wear a t-shirt in the swimming pool, the local swimming pool though, please discuss it with the manager at the swimming pool and explain why you may wish to wear one. So, is it possible to have a partial shower without wearing a stoma pouch? Yes, it is. Of course, once your wounds have healed. The water won't get soaked up if you soak yourself in a bath. It's not going to drink the water, but it could become active. So you might want to consider the time you're having a bath or shower, and you might wish to do this when it's less likely to work. Some people like to cover the stoma with gauze or a cap, but for a lot of people, they like just to get the water on the stoma too, and that's absolutely fine. For some, they take the bag off towards the end of the shower and give it a wash. Other people like to have the whole shower with the stoma pouch on. All I can advise you is, if you are having a shower or having a bath, don't use shower gels or soap, or if you do, rinse it well afterwards so that your new pouch will stick properly. So will I smell? When we go to the toilet, it's normal for all of us to smell. You're now leaning over it. If you've got a stoma on your tummy, it's right under your nose, so you might be much more aware of it. Consider using an air freshener or a deodorant in the air before you start. If the pouch is on correctly, however, there should be no smell unless you're emptying or changing it. Filters in the stoma pouches are usually made up of carbon or charcoal to let the gas out without a smell. If you're still getting a smell, consider speaking to your stoma team about trying some different bags. When the bag blows up, can I put a pin in it to deflate it? Please don't. If you do, all you're going to do is get a smell or the bag will leak. If you're having issues with ballooning, consider using a drainable pouch if you're someone who has a colostomy, using a closed bag so that you can let the gas out, or a two-piece system where you can do what they call burp it, which means separating the two pieces. Again, reassess your diet and see if there's anything you can do to reduce the platus that you have, the air in your abdomen. Should my stoma bleed when I clean it? It's not that it should, but it possibly will. There are many blood vessels, and so spotting is normal when you clean your stoma. And if the stoma bleeds with a trickle, apply some pressure and it should stop quickly. If it doesn't stop quickly, you do need to seek help. We don't want half a bag of blood. That's not normal. You can check for any abnormalities on the appearance of your stoma, and if you see any bumps or any problems there, ask your stoma nurse to reassess and advise. Sometimes we need to change the bags, perhaps they're rubbing, or it might be that you've grown something called granulomas, which are quite common little bumps on the stoma and sometimes need treatment. Just did a poo in the normal way. Is that normal when I have a stoma? It may be. If you have any part of your bowel below your stoma still intact, there may be faeces in that part of the bowel that was there before your operation that eventually works its way down to the bottom and you pass it. Also, the bowel naturally makes mucus, and so it may make mucus that works down to the bottom that you pass. If you're struggling with a lot of this and it's causing you a lot of distress, you might wish to talk to your doctor to see if you could have a suppository to help clear it. But you have to be very careful if you've had any surgery down in the rectum because of where the join might be made. If you have no bottom, if you've been sewn up underneath, of course it's not normal, but what you might feel is some phantom feeling as if you want to have a poo, but there won't be anything to pass. So do I need special clothes? Not really. You need to wear what feels comfortable. Some people find looser clothing better. We do suggest for men sometimes to wear braces instead of a belt, because a belt can be too tight across the stoma and prevent it filling properly, prevent the bag filling properly. You might want to consider higher waisted clothing to cover the bag. You might want to wear a looser t-shirt or top. One of the things I understand is quite helpful is to wear a vest under a white shirt, because otherwise you can sometimes see the shape of the bag under the shirt. Ask your stoma nurse about alternative coloured pouches. Currently there's not lots of different colours, but there is some that are now beige and white and black available on the market, and it may be that one of these might suit you better. So when can I go back to work or school? You need to discuss this with your doctor, GP or surgeon, and it's also about when you really feel ready. You might want to discuss with your workplace about a possible phased return. You might find that this is more acceptable to you to perhaps do shorter days to begin with. You might also want to discuss some of the options about working from home. With COVID, many people have been used to now working at home, and it does seem to be more of an option for some people. However, you shouldn't be frightened to go back to work, and sometimes you need to just take the plunge and go. But be prepared. Make sure you have some stoma supplies at work or school. Have use of a disabled toilet, and make sure that you've got some sanitary towel bins in the toilets that you can dispose your equipment in. These are the things that your workplace should be able to help you with. So can I travel? The answer to this is yes. It depends where you're going and what you're doing. If you're traveling by car, you might want to just make sure that you're having regular stops so that you can deal with your stoma should it start to fill. If you're going to travel abroad by aeroplane, then you might want to ask your stoma nurse for a passport travel certificate. This is a little card you can put in your passport that explains in various languages that you have a stoma. And so should you be searched, that they take you somewhere private to be seen. You might wish to ask your nurse also about some alternatives to bottles and sprays. I have to say a lot of the bottles and sprays that you may need for your stoma care are often 50 mils or less and okay. However, there are lots of things that are now made in a wipe rather than in a spray. Please always ensure you've got adequate supplies. Take double than what you need. You never know what's going to happen while you're away or if you get delays. I would suggest putting some of the supplies in each bag. If you're traveling with someone else, get someone to have some of your supplies in their bag as well as in yours. Find out what support is available from the delivery company you have while you're away. Some of them have contacts abroad. You may wish to ask your airline about extra hand luggage. You can't insist, but some airlines will give you extra hand luggage to take supplies on board. Don't forget you can't take scissors on board, so have your bags cut prior to your... Also, you may wish to consider using a drainable pouch, even if you've got a colostomist. This may mean that you've got less messing around if you have to deal with the pouch on the journey. Some people would suggest having an aisle seat because of not having to disturb people getting up and down. But I often say to people, if you have a window seat, a lot of people worry that their bag is going to blow up with gas. If you have a drainable bag and you had a window seat and you kept a cardigan out or something across your lap, you could quite discreetly open the bottom of the bag and let the air out. I know there might be a smell, but you could do that without anybody knowing that you're actually emptying the air. Consider the diet prior to your travel dates. Avoid all the foods that might give you gas or loose motion at least 24 to 48 hours before your travel. Try to always make sure you pack emergency medication, the loperamide and also diorolite to replace your electrolytes should you become having high output. I would suggest you use bottled water abroad to drink and also to clean your stoma. The stoma can absorb as well as produce, so therefore if you need bottled water abroad, you should be using the same to clean your stoma with. I think we've done another poll now about those people that may have sore skin or skin issues. Should I cut the hole bigger? Although I said you may need to cut the hole bigger if you're pancaking, if your skin is sore and you have an ileostomy particularly, you need to make sure that the pouch is fitting closely. You may wish to remeasure and ensure that the stoma fits closely around your stoma, and ask to speak to or see your stoma nurse to be reassessed. If your stoma bag is too big and you happen to have some seals at home, make sure you apply it closely around the stoma. There's 3 ways of putting this on. Sometimes just literally putting it over the stoma. Sometimes people apply it to the back end of the flange, and I usually teach people to actually break it and bring it around the stoma closely so that you know you've got it to fit closely. And I think you can see this on the next slide. Unfortunately, the picture does show that the skin is a bit sore on the first picture there. That's not just from output on the skin. Ileostomy output is quite corrosive, so it can burn the skin quite quickly, but fortunately it does heal quickly too. The other problem is that sometimes we see sore skin towards the edge of the pouch. Now, this is often caused by, we call this skin stripping, and this can be very painful, but it's often caused with how you've removed your pouch. And it's where you're removing the pouch and tearing your skin. When it's happening, always use adhesive remover, but when you use your adhesive remover, you need to peel a little bit of the flange back, spray some adhesive remover or you wipe behind it, count to 5, let the adhesive remover work, and then support your skin whilst you're removing the pouch. It's really important to do that, and that's more important really than the adhesive remover itself. If you have got an area of sore skin like that, you could consider cutting part of the flange off to let that area get to air to help. Air is a really good skin healer, so if you can let it air, that will be helpful. A lot of people also, I would suggest you moisturize outside of the flange on your pouch to keep your skin supple. Remember, everybody's different. Get to know your body and get to know your stoma, and try to take control, and you control your stoma, not your stoma control you. Thank you for listening.
Melissa, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Loads there, and we're really tight on time. And we've got tons of questions, and I want to get as many of them in as possible. So without further ado, and apologies, Wynne, for having kept you waiting, but I'm going to introduce everyone to the delicious Wynne Roberts. Hello, Wynne. And Wynne is here to have a conversation with Melissa about his experience of having a stoma. So over to you.
Thank you. Evening, Wynne. Good evening, Wynne. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry I talked rather a lot there. So can I ask you first, are you able to tell us a little bit about your stoma experience?
Well, I was diagnosed with bowel cancer in October 2019. I then had chemoradiotherapy up to April, knowing there was going to be, up to January. And then in April, I was supposed to have in March, I was supposed to have an operation. In the end, I went in for an operation in May during COVID. And I must admit, I had a difficult time because it took me a month to come out of hospital, and that was during COVID. I didn't see anybody, because I didn't realise that Arthur Scargill was hiding in my bowels. Those of you who are old enough to realise, my bowels went on strike and they wouldn't start up again. I then had, of course, the bag, and it was a bit of a worry to begin with, thinking, was it going to be, permanent, or was it going to be temporary? They hoped it was going to be temporary. It was on my right hand side. But then the problem was, when I soon realised I had a stoma from hell, because I think it worked for the MI5. You couldn't see it. If you look down, it looked like I had a second belly button. There was nothing sticking out. And so I had a month in hospital where once things started working, where they were going to have time to find a problem in getting a bag that actually fitted me, that actually worked, because everything they tried, it ended up being pancaking. Luckily, I was in the hospital for that time, and I've got to say, Coloplast, I know they sponsored this, but they were absolutely superb, because they kept sending different types of bags and everything to see if something worked in the end. I think we got it to work in the end, but within certain parameters. I think for the whole time, for the 14 months I had the bag, it was still a problem with pancaking and so on, which actually happened throughout the time that I had it. But we managed, and a lot of the stuff you've actually spoken to already, and you can ask me questions about how that can actually work. But trying different bags and different ways of putting it on and everything. It wasn't easy. I'm not built like a Chippendale, right? So therefore the problem was that it didn't quite snugly fit the way it should do. But we learned, and I picked up things and ideas and so on, and in the end we got it to work where I was able to have as normal life as possible with it.
And that's brilliant, Wynne. And I think you're right. It often needs quite a few bags to try before you find the right one for you.
Well, in the end, it was working, because I work within a health service. One day, after a few months, I had a phone call from one of your colleagues, you know, a specialist stoma nurse. And then she said, right, she said, I'm coming over now. She said, I'm fed up with this. She said, I'm going to sort you out. And she came over, and literally with me sitting on the toilet in the bathroom, with her on her knees in front of me, right, which sounded absolutely ridiculous, but it looked ridiculous as well. But she tried different bags and see how they worked, and tried different things, and it worked.
Good. That's, we often spend our life on our knees as stoma nurses, one angle or another. So do you have any day-to-day tips that you can share with those listening about your life, how you live with the stoma? You know.
Yeah, it's getting to a routine, you know, and I got to a routine how it worked. First of all, listen to your body. Listen, you've said this before, listen to how it works when it fills up. For example, for me, from about 4 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, nothing happened, right? There wasn't a titter out of it, which meant that's the time when I got up in the morning, I was able to change the bag, to have a bath, to have a shower, you know, to make sure everything was okay, because I knew nothing was going to be leaking from it, because it behaved itself. The rest of the time was bloody awful, but the rest of the time, in the morning, it was okay. And then I used to do things like, for example, I used to come up, I used to prepare my shower, then I used to put the bag on top of my radiator to make sure it warmed the bag nicely, so it stuck better onto me, you know. Then I had my shower, and then I used my hair dryer, and I hair dried my skin, and that dries the skin perfectly well. And it also warms up the skin nicely for the glue to work, adhesive to work, to put it on. And then you got to that routine in the end where it worked really, really, really well. And I got those ideas from videos from America, you know,
Right, yeah.
You know, and then to work it in that way, and then knowing what position to put it in. I realized it was better for me to put it on when I was standing up, not when I was sitting down. And the reason for that, because I'm not built, as I said, like a Chippendale. So therefore, it actually worked well and meant that it fitted well. And then put on the flanges and so on, which you can have. And then the other thing, when I was having my shower, to make sure I did not use a moisturizing shower gel.
Yeah.
Don't put any moisturizer on anything there, because what that does, it makes it actually, the glue, the adhesive does not work.
That's
so
right.
Therefore, make sure you use you know, don't use Nivea. Well, I'm going to be sued by Nivea now, but don't use any moisturizer one.
Other brands are available, I think, is what you're supposed to say, Wynne.
Other brands are available, right? And then the other part of it as well is making sure, again, that you realise when your bag is filling, when it fills with air, when it fills with the contents and so on, that you actually make sure that you work your day around that. Does that make sense? So therefore, if I was going out in the evening, I'd make sure I emptied it before I go out, you know, and don't put a new bag on before you go out, because at the end of the day, that could fail. So therefore, you make sure you put one in the morning, you know it's stuck on there like a limpet, and then you keep it then going throughout the day for when you go out for the meal or whatever, you know, in that way. As far as food is concerned, you mentioned that. I've got a funny diet, because most of my food, believe it or not, is Indian food. It's not the stuff you get in restaurants, but I normally eat Indian food, because a lot of my friends are Indian, from South India and so on. And people said to me, oh, you can't have Indian food, you can't have turmeric and chili or whatever. No, it was fine. The only thing I couldn't have, you mentioned sweet corn. The other thing I couldn't have is chickpeas. I once made, I love chickpeas, and I made a chickpea curry. It turned my stoma into a submachine gun, right? Because literally they came flying out there, and this is true. when I took the bag out, one chickpea, awful thing to say, came flying out and hit the cat. Right, so therefore, chickpea, no way, right? But everything else was fine.
Sorry, but I'm guessing you can eat your chickpeas if you have like hummus. It's just when they're solid like that in your carriage that you can't have them.
No way, right? You know, but other things, like I used to do silly things, like when I went to bed at night, I used to have a couple of digestive biscuits and a cup of milk. And of course, the Stoma nurse, far more intelligent than I am, turned around and said, hey, hold on for a second, you can't do that, because what that does is actually make your bowels work even harder at night, right? And it actually is the worst thing. The other thing I did as well was I learned in the end at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd set my alarm, and that's because I knew I had a balloon by then, you know. And little things like, for example, put a pillow behind your back to stop you from turning to your right-hand side, because you couldn't turn to your right side because you would burst the bag.
Right.
So either put a pillow or put the cat behind your back, and that will actually help stop you and keep you facing to the left.
Stop you rolling all the way over. And did you do anything to prepare for the reversal of your stoma, Wynne?
Yes, I did. My doctor told me right from the beginning. He said, pardon the language, right? He said, I've had a bit of a look, he said, and you're quite tight-arsed. So it's not too bad, he said. But I want you to actually do exercises. So wherever you are, when you're watching the film or whatever, clench your buttocks. Right?
Yeah.
And so when I used to watch a film, or I used to be sitting, or even when I'm driving the car, I used to sort of flex my muscles all the time, right? In order to make sure that your muscles were ready for when you actually had to use them. And I've got to say, you know, that I did have one near accident. I panicked. Nobody had told me what you said earlier on, by the fact that I could actually have a normal movement. And about, it must have been about 5 months after the op, one day I was sitting in the house and I thought, oh, I want to go to the loo. And then I thought, I definitely want to go to the loo. So I went to the loo, and I must admit, I had a really good one. Right? It was a good poo. Right? And I thought to myself, but I panicked. I thought, why? And then I phoned my consultant, and he just laughed his head off. He said, the problem is, he said, you were probably slightly blocked because of the pancaking. I haven't cut it off completely. And what's happened is your poo's said to itself, come on, lads, we're going down the other way. And so it went down the other way. And he said, did you have an accident? I said, no. I said, I just wanted to go. And then I went, and it was all, he said, fantastic, he said, it shows your muscles are working. Right?
Absolutely.
So I took that as a very positive thing. And I must admit, I'm now been without a bag now for about, it must be a year, and or more. And I must admit, I haven't actually had an accident once. It's actually,
fantastic.
I've been able to go, you know, when I needed to go. And as you said yourself, you know, it wasn't easy when I first had the bag removed, because there's some evidence for this, although people don't always agree with it. I developed gluten intolerance. So for the first 6 months after, I had huge problems with flatulence, with going to the toilet at different parts of the day. Then somebody suggested it, and I stopped taking gluten. I went on gluten-free, which are now easy with Tesco's and so on. Oh, sorry, that's naming another firm now, right? And then what then happened was that within 3 days of having that, it stopped. And now I only go to the toilet at 9 o'clock at night every night. But I go about over about half an hour, you know, because I haven't got such of a holding tank in there, as the doctor said. So it takes a little bit longer, but only about half an hour. So I go 2-3 times at that half an hour, and that's the end of it.
Thank you so much, Wynne.
Yes, you've probably spotted by my appearance that I'm just going to have to cut in, because I'm watching the clock and I'm aware that we've got so many really good questions. So if you would both be happy to stay on, and
Yes.
I think some of our questions might also bring up some of the things that you might have gone on to talk about between you. So we've had lots of questions around absorption of various nutritional elements, and people worrying about not getting enough because they're having to cut certain foods out, and a lot of questions about supplements. So I'll sort of try my hardest to summarize them all in one. So we've had somebody saying, I've been told things like evening primrose oil and vitamin D will block my stoma. Is there anything any way of taking those supplements to make sure I get the benefit that I need for those sorts of things?
I think the only thing I would say, my own personal feeling, is my diet didn't change for the whole time that I was on it. I was advised by everybody to change my diet, and that was because I was taking a lot of spices and whatever, but I never had that a problem. But I think, and at the end of the day, I didn't worry too much. The only thing was very important, which was added to me, is to make sure that I had enough salt. Because what they said is that the part which isn't included because of the bag and the stoma, meant that's the bit that takes a salt in order for you to get the right level of salt in your body. So therefore the doctor said to me, make sure that you actually take enough salt, which I've now cut down on now, but at the time it was that. The other thing I did as well, because of my pancaking, they actually told me to make sure that I took, they advised me to take prune juice, which I used to take every day, and that kept everything flowing, if you like, because the problem I had was it getting a bit too thick. Does that make sense? But at the end of the day, if you've got a good balanced diet, no matter what you are, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think sometimes when people have got ileostomies and the output's quite runny, they run the risk of not absorbing all the nutrients they need if it's higher up than if it's in the terminal ileum. If it's right at the end of the ileum, it should adjust and ultimately you absorb what you need. What you might find is there's some of those supplements that people are asking about. If they come in a capsule form, they might not break down very quickly, and it might be worth looking at it in a different format if they feel they need it. But more importantly would be to discuss with the doctor to see if they are actually nutritionally depleted in something, and sometimes that is the case, and they may need certain things prescribed to counteract that. Most of those things, usually as time goes on, your body adjusts a little bit. If you've got an ileostomy that you're keeping for a long time, sometimes vitamin B12 can be a problem because it's at the end of the ileum that you absorb the vitamin B12. And you don't always know that until later on, because we've got a store in the body that holds on to this for about 3 months. So it's not until later on. So again, if you're not seeing the nurses and the doctors regularly at the hospital, it might be worth seeing the GP to just do some blood tests to make sure you're not deficient in anything and it's not having an effect on your electrolytes and your hemoglobin if you're not absorbing something efficiently.
That's really interesting, Melissa, because actually B12 was one of the ones that was mentioned, as was magnesium and iron. People were concerned about sort of not being able to absorb the levels that they need. So is that, I guess that's go to your GP for any of those and have a blood test.
I always feel for our patients that have ileostomies, I quite like them to have a blood test about 2 weeks after they've left hospital, and probably again at about a month. It's not always like a standard treatment, but I do find that sometimes people do start to have show signs of depletion of magnesium and potassium, and you can tweak it a little bit in your diet by having, I know it's hard, I've said no green vegetables and things, but sometimes bananas will have more potassium in, a bit more magnesium. You can look at those kind of foods that have that, and even if you have it in a kind of smoothie, it may help you up it. But also the doctors need to be alerted if you're not absorbing the magnesium. and potassium, and perhaps give you supplements.
Great. And
appropriate.
somebody has actually said that there are some of the vitamins are available in sprays rather than tablets or capsules, which might be useful. So sticking with reduced absorption, we've had a question from somebody who has been prescribed doxycycline, so antibiotic because they've got a chemo rash from their cetuximab, and they're wondering whether or not the absorption of that antibiotic will be impacted by having a stoma.
Depends on the type of stoma they've got.
Ileostomy, sorry.
If it's an ileostomy. Again, if it's at the end of the terminal ileum, I would hope they could absorb what they need. If they feel that then, and I would also hope that if they've been prescribed the antibiotics, probably by their oncologist, if it's as a result of their treatment, and hopefully they've considered that. Obviously, if it's not going away, they may have to revisit that with the doctors, but usually you've absorbed what you require in the small bowel. It's when you've lost some of the small bowel that it can become more of a problem, usually.
Right, and we've had a couple of questions, Melissa, from people who have a stoma and a hernia, either underneath or close to their stoma opening, and they're saying they're really struggling to find information on how to manage those two things together. Have you got any tips?
Hernias, unfortunately, are very, very common, and I know I talked about how to try and prevent them by supporting your tummy, but sadly they do occur because there's a weakness there. You could talk to your stoma nurse about perhaps having a support belt or support underwear if it's causing like a dragging feeling, which often it does. Some people find that a support belt is of an advantage. Some of the support belts have holes in them specifically for the stoma bag, but actually a lot of the time we would advise they don't have a hole in them, because it's right at that point where you want most support if you're wearing abdominal support, rather than making a hole and then you've got an opening just where you're wanting most support around the stoma. If your stoma's warm and pink and it's working regularly, there's no need for concern. If it stops working, it's causing a lot of pain, or the stoma itself changes colour and goes dusky or dark or blue or black, then you need to go to hospital, because that could show that the blood supply is being constricted. That is rare, but it can happen. But you'd normally get pain and be sick as well with that, and you'd know that you needed to go to a hospital. But hernias on their own, we tend to leave alone, because even if you have a stoma reposition, they can come back. If you've got a temporary stoma, the hernia will probably be repaired when you have your next surgery anyway, at that point. If you have a permanent stoma and it's getting more difficult to manage with the hernia, then you may wish to be referred back to the surgeon to see if you're suitable to have something done to repair it, because obviously if you've got a great bulge there and it's uncomfortable and you can't bend down and do your shoes up, then that might be something to consider. A small bulge we tend to leave well alone.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. We've had a couple of questions actually from people who have an ileostomy, who say often they have a feeling that their pouch feels full, but when they investigate further, it's just air. Should they be worrying? What could they do?
Right, there's nothing they need to worry about. It is what they've swallowed, sadly, more than anything else, because diet has some effect, but with an ileostomy it's often what you've swallowed. So all the things I said before, avoiding the fizzy drinks, trying not to talk and eat at the same time, don't drink through a straw, sadly snoring, which you've got no control over, you're swallowing a lot of air.
Don't sleep.
Yeah, I can't advise no sleep, but you know, there may be reasons why it's happening. And if it's just that the bag keeps blowing up with air, obviously you can let it out from the bottom, but that's not always convenient. But perhaps try again a different pouch, because sometimes filters work better in some pouch
make than another for specific people. The carbons they use in the filters can be more effective in some makes than others for different types of gas that's produced. So it's not that any one pouch is better than another, it's just sometimes the filter for you works differently, so it's sometimes worth considering.
Great. We've had a few people have asked us questions about having 2 stomas, which is my education for this evening. I've been frantically Googling it. And in particular, people who or there's somebody who's anxious about their surgery. They've been told it will leave them with 2 stomas, and I think it's the sort of anxiety around they won't let me out of hospital, will they, until I'm absolutely okay with managing both. So is there any advice for that person, and also just sort of any top tips in general for people who are coping with 2 stomas?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's hard when you're faced with this, and it depends on what the 2 stomas are. You may have that you've got either a colostomy and an ileostomy, and then also a urostomy, a urinary stoma. That is possible. Now, the stoma nurse hopefully will meet the patient before they're going into hospital and can talk to them about the differences and how the different pouches that they'll need. And often they're cited slightly different level sometimes, just to help with clothes and if you needed a belt. But that's not always possible for everybody. We need to avoid folds and creases most. Sometimes you've got 2 stomas being like a colostomy or an ileostomy, and then a non-functioning stoma. So if you've got an ileostomy, for instance, that's coming out of the small bowel, but they need to create a colostomy part on the other side to divert something, or just as a to reconnect later on. Sometimes you've got a stoma there that's not doing anything. So it's there as a mouth or opening, but it's inactive. So it depends on how what the 2 stomas are. If it's all part of the colon, only one is likely to be active. But if one is for urine and one is for the colon or ileum, then you're going to have 2 active stomas. Of course, whoever it is that's worried, I'm sure the stoma nurse will help them with whatever and make sure they've got the right bags for their situation. And then normally, if it's a urostomy and either a colostomy or ileostomy, they normally have them on different sides of the body so that the bags will stick well. But obviously each situation is different and circumstances may be different.
And I'm guessing that the stoma team will be, on hand for anybody sort of post-surgery before they're discharged to make sure that handling both of them is something that you're confident to do.
I would certainly hope so. Certainly where we are, we don't let anyone go home until they can look after their stoma bag. They're not allowed to leave the hospital. They may not be expert, but they can manage, because we know that it's very daunting when you first go home and very different, and you've not got somebody at the end of a buzzer when you ring. So you might not have picked exactly the bags that you're going to use, but as long as you've got something that's staying on, that you can change it, you can manage it, that's really what most stoma nurses are after. And yes, sadly the doctors often have a habit of going around saying, oh, they can go home tomorrow, without really thinking about
the nurses won't let that happen, is what you're saying.
The whole practicalities of it. So the stoma nurse will probably dig their heels in and say, no, not yet.
Good. We just very quickly to finish up, we did have a number of questions asking about particular foods, some of which you covered during your slide, but there were 2 very specific can I eat questions, which I just want to pose to you because I'm fascinated for the answer. So this person says, my surgeon told me I could eat what I fancied with no restrictions on food. However, I am aware some foods are more problematic. I have an ileostomy. So you ready? Bean sprouts cooked, yes or no? Can I eat them?
Again, it's individual. I would say certainly uncooked bean sprouts be very careful of, because they're quite fibrousy and they can come along and they're stringy. But same as like celery does that, it can come along and get stuck. When they're cooked, often they go softer. So for some people, they have no problems at all. But what I would say is try anything little amounts and see what happens for you. And if the stoma is a very, very tiny stoma where you've been having problems anyway with things coming through, then you're going to be more cautious.
if you've had most foods coming through without any problem, I think you can be a little bit more adventurous. Now, you don't always know if your stoma is small or not, because you don't know what's normal to it. But if your stoma nurse or anybody's told you it's like slightly stenosed, then you need to be much more careful with what's going in. You have to think of it a bit like putting stuff down a plug hole. You can in the sink. If you're putting stuff down, then you put a lot of something down there, it won't go down. If you put one or two things down, perhaps it would go.
Right.
So take it slowly and see. But specific advice you probably need from your nurses or doctors if you have a particular problem with your stoma. But I've got patients that eat everything, even though I tell them not to, and others that only have to look at something and they're in trouble.
I'm guessing then that the answer you've just given applies to the last food stuff, and I'm going to do a win here. Other brands are available. It was pickle made by a particularly famous pickle manufacturer.
Right, okay, so if you've got chunky pickle and you've got chunky
It was chunky pickle.
Chunky pickle with chunky bits in it, it's more likely if you've got a very tiny stoma that it might have trouble coming through. However, from experience, often these things do still come through. They just come through the way they went in, so you see them in your bag. That's what I say. Same with peas and sweet corn. Wynne said he couldn't, have problems with sweet corn, but people that eat it and it just comes out the way it went in, but that's fine. And the other warning with that as well, just while I'm on foods, is beetroot. If you're eating beetroot, there's no reason why you can't have it, but do be aware if it suddenly looks like blood in your bag. The colour of beetroot.
Well,
think again about what you've had.
And keep your cat away, because from the sounds of it, Wynne was, taking the cats out with chickpeas.
I think yes, but one thing is that go with what you want. For example, for 25 years I was a vegetarian. I didn't touch meat until halfway through all of this, where I couldn't go to bed at night without actually dreaming about a steak. And I don't know why, and I just could not stop thinking about eating meat. I phoned my doctor, and he turned down and said, listen, he said, my oncologist actually, and said, listen, I think it's probably the fact that you're low on iron is actually telling you need to start getting some more iron in you, which explains for what Melissa said earlier on. And since then, I'm having steak all the time. After 25 years, I actually turned. But then that was it. It's about knowing what works and what doesn't work. And all of a sudden, you'll try something and you'll think to yourself, oh, that's worked. Something else, and you'll have hell on earth the following day. But there we are.
Wynne, did your stoma have a name? Did your bag have a name?
No, it didn't, actually.
No, okay. I mean, there were some brilliant suggestions. I'm just going to share with you my favourites from the chat. We had Cecil the Cesspit, which I love, Bag for Life, Bit on the Side, which I was very fond of, Boris, which I think we can all see where they were going with that one. But I think my favourite for the night is Dolce and Gabbana, which I just think is brilliant.
That is brilliant. And I have to share with you, one of my ladies said to me once, look, I'm a designer lady, I've got to have a designer name, and hers is called Louis Pouton.
Louis Pouton, there you go. There's a line in this for us somewhere.
I think there should be a name book for stomas, yeah.
And the funny thing is, actually, that part of my job is I'm an entertainer, so I sing as well, right? But somebody was saying the other day when I was I was in the theatre, I was doing a show and putting on my makeup, and they said, "Oh, that's a handy bag you've got." It was actually the Coloplast bag which they gave me with all the stuff in there. So I've got two bags of them. One now is a makeup bag for me, and the second one is all my stuff for polishing my guitars. So therefore, it's using it for positive ways. Don't look at all this in negative ways.
Brilliant. Melissa and Wynne, it has been, well, the fact that we've overrun and I will be in so much trouble for allowing it to
that was my fault.
is testament to how brilliant a night it's been, and how many questions there were. To those of you who asked questions, if we didn't quite get round to answering it, we will ask Melissa if she'll very kindly provide us with answers, and we'll send them to you afterwards. But for now, Melissa and Wynne, just thank you so much from all of us and everybody watching. It's been a brilliant night, and thank you for sharing your stories.